So here's the question. Were the ancient Egyptians at one time in North and Central America? Now, to some that may sound like a strange question, and the answer would most likely be, of course not. But my response to this would be, if the Egyptians did in fact design and build the pyramids, doesn't it stand to reason that they would have the technology to travel anywhere in the world they wanted to? So we are going to take a trip to the Grand Canyon to explore the remains of a mystery. Why would there be pyramids in the Grand Canyon, let alone North America? Is the Sphinx in the Grand Canyon older than the Sphinx in Egypt? Huh? What? Oh yes, folks. We have some things to discuss. And as crazy as that all sounds, let us consider while the ancient Egyptians were maintaining a powerful empire for generations, what was going on with the rest of the world. Well, some of the discoveries made over the years to you may seem to be quite shocking. So to start off, we all need to release ourselves from this idiotic, arrogant notion that ancient civilizations were somehow primitive compared to today's civilization. Because in many aspects, we are the primitive ones. We are the civilization lacking in knowledge. Folks, we don't really have advanced technology. We have expensive technology. All these things we have today, they cost the lives of plants, animals, and people. They consume massive amounts of resources. They pollute the planet to no end. Our food is dramatically less nutritious. We are so unhealthy that we have to keep coming up with new names for diseases that were not as widespread as they are today, or didn't even exist before. Everybody's got something, even when they are healthy. Knowledge is what advances us as a species, and today we are lacking in it big time. So the Grand Canyon is a geological marvel. At its widest point, it is 18 miles across, and the canyon stretches over 270 miles in length, with a depth of 1 mile. Now, some may think that they know how the Grand Canyon was formed, but they do not. Its formation to this day remains a mystery, mainly because most of the evidence needed to make conclusions about its formation are no longer there, washed away. Those of you who have seen my presentation on giant ancient tree stumps may recall that I entertained the idea of the Grand Canyon being some type of gigantic ancient quarry. In other words, the alternate theory is that this was dug out. Impossible as that may seem, where is the missing rock? Because this is not a giant crack in the earth that just spread out over time. The possibility of this being an ancient seabed seems to make sense at first glance because of the Colorado River. But the deepest lake known today is Lake Baikal in Russia, which is just over 1 mile deep. It is likely that the Grand Canyon was filled with different levels of water throughout history, but when you hear a geologist describe its formation, they sound absolutely ridiculous. It's almost pseudoscientific. How can undersea rocks get thousands of feet above sea level? Well, it's the Laramide orogeny during the Cretaceous Wacky Tertiary period, and over a gazillion years of erosion, we have the Grand Canyon. Now, of course, I'm being facetious here, folks, but you get the idea. The point is, it's mostly all theory. None of these people were there. Now they are saying the canyon is only over 5 million years old. still cut out by the river. But they have yet to explain the topography. In other words, how do you get these unusual land formations from flowing water? Even the spillover theory, although strong in its case, is debatable. It is quite interesting to hear the many theories on how the canyon was formed, but who cares, right? Here, we are more interested in what or who was once in the Grand Canyon. After all, plants, animals, and people love to settle near fresh bodies of water. The reason I bring this up is because if the water level had descended over time, then it would have exposed an abundance of mineral resources that could have been mined by ancient civilizations over time to some degree. How many of you think that perhaps the ancient Egyptians, among others, did at one time occupy the Grand Canyon, when life and resources were abundant, and then abandoned the site once the resources were consumed? I mean, they were great sailors, and they also were able to build structures that today we cannot. Not to mention their long-lived history. They would have had plenty of time to be in and out of North and Central America many times over. If the human race originated in Africa and around the Fertile Crescent, then it would make sense that people who traveled further north and far east would, throughout the early generations, biologically adapt to the new environment in which they settled. Not only would the environment be significantly different with variable seasons, the vegetation, food would be different, giving birth to varied races of humans. Of course, one of the most commonly known hypotheses is that people migrated across the Bering Strait, up through Russia, across the Arctic, through Alaska, and down into North America. Which makes sense, as there are definitely obvious traits of Asian and African descent in Native Americans. Now, I do not want to get into the Tower of Babel story here because I want to save that for another presentation. But I want you to understand that even though languages change as you go out from Africa, you can see influence from one culture into the next, as people who migrate tend to take their cultures with them. This is why you see Egyptian and African influence in structures of ancient Europe, Greece, and East Asia. Are you with me so far? You see, what I'm trying to do is get you to understand that Egyptians settling in North and Central America is not too far-fetched. In fact, it is not very surprising at all. So, on April 5th, 1909, there was a newspaper article published in the Phoenix Gazette entitled "Explorations in the Grand Canyon, Mysteries of Immense Rich Cavern Being Brought to Light. Remarkable finds indicate ancient people migrated from the Orient." This article was based on the discovery of G. Kincaid, a scout for the Smithsonian Institution, who claimed to have found a deep underground cavern in the Grand Canyon, home to many, many artifacts that appeared to be of ancient Tibetan or even Egyptian origin. Mummies, copper tools formed to be hard as steel, relics, statues, hieroglyphics, all in a citadel that could easily house 50,000 plus people. Now, most people with good reasoning understand that the article put out was most likely sensationalized. How much of the article is true, we may never know. The Smithsonian even denies employing Kincaid. So there are a few interesting things here. Number one, many areas around and in the Grand Canyon are off limits. You can't go there. No trespassing signs everywhere. It's either a state park, military reservation, Indian reservation, closed off for scientific and historical research and preservation. Kincaid's cave is also supposedly too hard to find, and if you did find it, it would be extremely difficult and dangerous to get to. Another thing that is interesting is that many sites in the Grand Canyon are named after Egyptian, Hindu, and Tibetan temples. There's the Confucius Temple, Dragon Head, Temple of Isis, the Buddha Temple, the Shiva Temple, the Brahma Temple, Zoroaster Temple, the Vishnu Temple, and a few others, all located within the Grand Canyon National Park near the north and south rim. Now, these structures may just simply remind people of actual sites in Egypt and Asia, and that is why they were given those names. But it does seem somewhat odd on Native American land. This is the Temple of Isis, which seems strangely similar to a step pyramid or one of the temples in Myanmar. But this is just formed from natural erosion, right? Vishnu Temple, which some claim may have been a sphinx much older than the Great Sphinx of Egypt, heavily eroded beyond recognition at certain angles, and you can Google map this in 360 degrees, does take on a sphinx-like shape. What makes this stand out is that the structure is a different color rock than the iron-rich red rock underneath it. Lake Powell, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, Illinois, Ohio. These are all a few of the places where people have claimed to have found ancient artifacts with hieroglyphics. Now, east of the Valley of Fire and west of the Grand Canyon boundary is this. Is this a rock carving resembling an Egyptian sarcophagus or statue? Of course, one could easily write this off as a natural formation, except there are two of them, almost identical on opposite sides of each other. Folks, doesn't it seem interesting that the Native American culture carries similarities to that of ancient Egyptian culture? God kings, the animal worship, the rituals, the mound building, knowledge of the stars. They both have mummies. Look at the similarities in their writing. I mean, how many pyramids can you find in Central America? Maybe these two distant civilizations were worshiping the same gods. Maybe it was these gods, or should I say fallen angels, that instilled these two separate civilizations with the same beliefs and knowledge. This may be all coincidental, folks, but this does bring up another great question. Who came first? Where did the Egyptians come from? Sudan? The Fertile Crescent? Or did they migrate into the other direction from Central America up and over all the way down into Egypt? Now that would rewrite history in many, many ways. Trust me, when people travel in one direction, you can bet that they will at some point definitely travel back in the other direction. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the ships the Europeans used to get to America. You're telling me people who built the pyramids couldn't do that? Think about this. Why would a god king, a pharaoh, limit his empire to only Egypt? Everyone else was out to command and conquer. Why would it be any different for the Egyptian empire? Due to the amount of evidence left behind and the mysterious nature of these old structures, we really only have a sense of what the ancient Egyptians or other ancient civilizations were truly capable of. But sometimes figuring these things out takes not only science, but a little bit of imagination.